Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
More and more Americans see Israel and America as countries to feel angry, guilty, and ashamed about. Israeli and American flags are burned in campus protests. They see these countries as colonial, inherently racist, and socially unjust. They must be burned to the ground. Their alliance must be broken. We discuss this with a writer who has the opposite opinion. Michael Finch is a poet and essayist and the president of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, a conservative think tank and action tank that seeks to defend the moral, cultural, and economic foundations of free societies. He just published his remarkable book with essays titled A Time to Stand. A Time to Stand, The Dire Hour to Defend American Beauty. Michael is not only an appreciated guest today in our show, he's also a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and of this podcast. Michael, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Phyllis, for having me on. It's a real honor. I'm incredibly grateful. And again, I can't thank you enough. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to a great discussion. You guys do a great work, and God bless everything you do. And
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So, the title of your book, A Time to Stand, The Dire Hour to Defend American Beauty. Here it is again. The title suggests American culture is in danger. What danger do you feel it is in?
Well, I think our culture and really our whole kind of historical background of the is, it's an incredibly aspirational, beautiful, wonderful, great nation. I think we all can attest to that. And but it's under attack, and it's been under attack from the left for a number of years. We see this in the a lot of the woke movement, the movement to replace 1776 as the birth of America with 1619, attacking. Again, we talk about Israel, the attacks on Israel. Many of the same attacks that are leveled against Israel are, of course, leveled against the United States. We're racist, genocidal. We're an imperialistic power, and that, of course, we did own slaves. The Christopher Columbus came to the New World to despoil the environment and create a genocide, not to discover the New World. So we're painted and pictured really as a country that really has nothing to be proud of. That we should be this kind of self-loathing of our country and our history and our culture is very prevalent, and it's been seeping through the education system for over 50 years. Frankly, I mean, that's David Horowitz talked about the long march through the institutions, and what the left has done is infiltrated our educational system. So again, our students are learning a very different. We see this, of course, in stark and with what's happened to the position of Israel, which once 50, 60 years ago, Israel was the underdog. It was greatly admired by the United States, by the vast majority of our citizens, and that has changed dramatically again through this the takeover of our education system, this hatred of America, the hatred of Israel, both of those, and it's definitely had a severe effect on our culture. If we don't, culture tends to unite a country. It binds us together. It gives us a common purpose. And in America, that's critical because we have, 350 million people that have come from all over the world with very different beliefs, different religions, different faiths. And we need something to unite and bind us. And that's what culture does. Well, if you destroy the belief in the culture, if there's nothing to be proud of, then you balkanize. That America becomes incredibly fractured, and I don't think there's any question that that has happened again over the last 50 years, and particularly in the last few years. We see it on the campuses, we see it in our schools. So it is a dire hour. It's not hopeless, but it is a dire hour.
And when you speak about culture, American culture, do you mean the arts, or do you mean the values?
A little bit of both. I mean, it is. I mean, in the book, I write about a lot of things, but I focus on arts, literature, poetry, architecture. So I do focus on those kind of cultural items, but it's also the American history, and I talk about that as well. So it's the attack on our history. Anything, American culture, we have an incredibly rich cultural history. There was a golden age of American culture, which is kind of world renowned, but not recognized as much, and really not recognized by Americans. We don't, of course, we're not taught the beauty of American culture, but we don't recognize that America has an incredibly rich, and again, the key word is aspirational. American culture is incredibly aspirational. So again, those attacks on those values, those beliefs. So it is about, but the architecture, your state capitals, the buildings in Washington, the beautiful buildings in Washington D.C., the national capital, architecture, the art in America, the literature and the poetry, all kind of unite in kind of a cultural, kind of unite us culturally to something that is great and aspirational. So yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's those attacks, I think, that have really kind of are devastating.
So
Can you
is
explain, Evelyn? Let me just,
go ahead.
what does aspirational mean for you? I think it's a very, very, very important word to explain to our audience.
And
Well, I
to
think
me,
from
I
the
had the same question. Yeah.
Okay, from the American founding, I mean, and in a sense, and this is some of the original ties to Israel, to the Jewish people, is America was seen as the new, the new Jerusalem, the kind of the new covenant, the city on a hill, and were something new that the world had never seen. So I think America in its founding documents was creating something. What Thomas Jefferson wrote, again, in spite of the flaws, and we can get into that we certainly are not flawed. We're human. But America was aspiring to something that the world had never seen. And there was this, and when the first settlers got here and they came to America, they looked at America, and I know that there was Native Americans here. This was not completely empty, but in a sense, particularly in a cultural sense, America was a blank canvas, ready to be built, settled, written about, ready to be painted in that sense. And that's the way that Jefferson and many of the original founders and these original artists saw America as this incredible land. And we're tied to that land. It's a beautiful land. And that's the sea to shining sea, manifest destiny, all of that. And again, to create this new republic, something that had never been created in the world, that's the aspiration. And then it has, over time, over 250 years, it is the reason why millions of people around the world aspire to come to, many want to come to America and fulfill that kind of the American dream or their dream in a country where, you can aspire to be anything, where all faiths are recognized and protected. We have religious freedom, we have economic freedom. I mean, a lot of those kind of, freedoms are eroding, but this is still, I think, the most aspirational country, I think, in world history. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but it is incredibly aspirational. So that's my point. And the culture points to that, to those aspirations. I mean, a Walt Whitman poem, when he talks about, the open road in America, it's all aspirational. The paintings, the landscape paintings of the 19th century, again, recognizing this incredible beauty of the country is also, it's all aspirational. I think that is the word that really defines American culture and our history.
So if I understand you well, and I'm not born and raised in America or in American culture, I still try to understand it. But if I understand you well, you say America had this Jerusalem-inspired aspiration of lifting up the people that live in it, lifting up humanity, at least within its own country, towards freedom. Do I understand it?
Yeah, I mean,
Well?
religious freedom overall, and
And
I'm
prosperity,
generalizing.
and prosperity,
And
freedom,
prosperity.
freedom,
Yes.
and prosperity. If you read the founding documents, that's what you come across, right? Freedom for every person and prosperity, the right to prosperity. Is that correct?
Yeah, the right to pursue happiness, right? I mean,
Or
that's kind of
or
in
the
the
right
American,
to pursue prosperity.
that pursue, yeah, happiness, prosperity.
I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting that one of the things that was dropped when the very early settlers came was no class titles. That has always been of interest to me.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we came from England, our culture and language, and so much came. We owe so much to England, but we broke that tie, and we did. That's why we don't have a king, and we got rid of the titles. That was not going to be America. Okay, America broke from that. Um, the original, even and again, this creates the American myth. It's not the case in every instance in American history, but the Pilgrims, when they came here, they were fleeing. They were religiously persecuted in England, and they came to America to be able to practice their religion freely. And in a sense, they saw themselves as the Jews fleeing Egypt and finding the homeland, right? I mean, the promised land, and this was the promised land. So there are parallels, and again, it's not exact, and I'm overgeneralizing perhaps to a sense, but that's how the Pilgrims felt. That's how the Pilgrims felt, that this was kind of the new Jerusalem, that they were finding the promised land, and that they were driven by providence, that God was behind this. So, there is a lot of similarities in that, and I think that I mean, America, and we can get into this, I think probably in a little bit. America has been a safe haven for Jews since the founding. I mean, Americans, they came to Charleston, South Carolina, right after the original founding, Rhode Island. So Jewish history is integral to American history. And they were able to come here, Jews were able to come here, mostly Sephardic Jews when they came to Charleston, but they were fleeing persecution. Or discrimination, and they were able to come to America to find a home. And so it all kind of links. I mean, our bond with the Jewish people goes back to the American founding. This isn't something that was, created in 1947. Goes back, for the original settlers of America.
Let's talk about anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. How has this been affected by this cultural change?
But I think it's pretty, it's pretty sweeping. I mean, America's going through tremendous changes, economic, cultural, and anti-Semitism, and we'll get into that in a second. But I think the changes that we're going through, the technological revolution, AI, and all of these things, the dismantling of our manufacturing base, globalism, these have had profound effects across the world. Obviously, it's also resulted in lifting millions of people out of poverty. For the United States, it's been a tremendous, again, in some ways, a devastating change. I mean, it holds great promise, but I think the changes that we're going through are equivalent to going through the Industrial Revolution. And there's going to be a lot of unsettling. And America is still coping with a lot of those changes. And in parts of the country, Silicon Valley and Manhattan, well, maybe not Manhattan right now, but in parts of the country, this new global economy has created tremendous prosperity and success. In other parts of the country, it has created tremendous kind of destruction of jobs. And you see, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about what ails America: living standards dropping, middle class income dropping, life expectancy dropping, drug addiction. And, there was a book called Lost Connections that was written a few years ago. There's a lot of lost connections. I mean, we've become kind of unmoored from our kind of our roots, and the lack of community. So all those things are affecting us tremendously. And when those things happen to a society, and this is just human nature, we're going to look for someone to blame. There's going to have to be someone to blame. And unfortunately, this is the great curse and cancer of world history. Jews are always the one that are going to get the blame. At least, if their Jews are present in a particular culture, in a society, inevitably, they are going to get the blame. There's been times in history where it was the Chinese or the Indians, for Indians who traveled around the world or had settled in Africa and other parts, and they were the ones to take the blame when things started to fall for a country. Well, unfortunately, for much of the world, in Europe and around the world, and of course in America, in a sense now, we're starting to see the finger pointed at who else. I mean, it's not only the Jews, but the Jews are always going to be the ones that are going to be kind of the brunt of this blame. And we've seen that, and Evelyn, you and I have spoken about this. We've seen it rising leftist anti-Semitism has been here for a long time. Islamic anti-Semitism, you've done shows on this, so this is very prevalent. We know about that, but it's not like conservatives, Republicans, and Christians are immune to anti-Semitism. I really believe it. I can't think of the other term other than it's a cancer. And once it gets into the system, once it metastasizes and cancer spreads, and I fear that is what's happening in America, and it's going to affect everyone, and it's affecting kind of the conservative movement and to a certain degree. I don't want to over exaggerate it, but it is a rising problem. So again, Jews are in the crossfire from both the left and the right. And I think we see this more and more. And a lot of that is because of this kind of cultural, economic, this kind of, I don't want to just say a collapse, but a lot of it is just major upheaval in society. And that causes a lot of unrest, a lot of insecurity. And when that happens, people tend to look out elsewhere to say who's to blame, the bankers, the industrialists, or whatever. And unfortunately, Jews are going to be caught in that crossfire, which is incredibly tragic. It's not right, but I think we're seeing that more and more in America today.
So if we look at that phenomenon, that rising anti-Semitism at the right, in the conservative movement, where it's rising to now, is that a spontaneous expression, or a spontaneous expression of fear of a changing society that is not only changing in the advantage of everybody, but also in the disadvantage of many people? Or is it like it is on the left? Is it fed by professors, influencers, journalists? How does that work, you think?
I think both.
At the right.
And I mean, it's kind of a perfect storm in a sense. You have all these kind of cultural, economic changes. The conservative movement, the Republican Party, the conservative movement it's been through its own upheavals. I think I'm a huge America First, and I'm a big fan of President Trump, and I'm a believer in America First, at least for the most part of that philosophy. But America First means kind of like George McGovern's "Come Home, America," right? It means that we are going to turn inward, and in many ways, look, protect our border. We cannot be the policemen of the world. I think the Iraq and Afghan wars have been devastating. And look, I was a supporter of those wars. Many of us were. Most of the conservative movement was behind those wars. And I'm not going to say taking out Saddam Hussein was a horrible thing. I mean, he was someone that and we won't even get into the debate about the Iraq War, but we recognize now that it turned into a disaster. And I think the disasters of those two wars are going to be impacted on America for a long time. It is turning us inward, and that is not necessarily, again, a bad thing, but there's going to be kind of side effects to that. Like, Americans do not want their citizens dying for the Donbass in Ukraine. American citizens, for the vast majority, and again, I don't want to get in this argument about Ukraine and Russia, which side, but Americans don't want to go into eastern Ukraine to fight the Russians. Okay, that's not our fight. We're going to see this more and more. America and NATO are very fractured. Do we need American troops? We really need all those American troops in South Korea. Well, again, this is going to lead to why is Israel receiving such large foreign aid? Why are we so allied with the state of Israel? And Americans are seeing this as, this is another foreign entanglement, and fairly or unfairly, Israel is going to get the blame for, we're bombing Iran because, that kind of helps Israel. Was Israel the one that pushed us into Iraq? We hear all these kind of conspiracies. And so as kind of this movement inward, this America First, we need to kind of fortress America. Unfortunately, we could throw the blame at the South Koreans or NATO or anything, but of course it's going to be Israel, because it's always Israel, or it's always the Jews that are going to take this blame. Like, they're leading us down this kind of globalist international path that has bled kind of treasure and the loss of our soldiers. And somehow Israel is to blame for that one too. And we've seen that, and that's really what's coming out now. Like Israel drives our foreign policy. I would argue the opposite. Maybe we need to disentangle a little bit because we are the ones putting the pressure on Israel. It's the United States that calls Israel and tells them, do this, don't do that, right? Israel is a sovereign nation. It's a very powerful nation. It's a country that we need to have strong relations with. They're a great ally. But this idea that Israel has this outstanding influence on us, I would argue, of course, it's the other way around. We're the ones always putting the pressure on Israel. But again, Israel, the Jews are going to get the blame, and I think that's part of this kind of upheaval. And so the change in politics away from this kind of globalist, the policemen be the world's policemen, creating democracies in Afghanistan, which is was foolish. Creating a Western style democracy in Baghdad, that was never going to happen. So we're pulling back from that. And then you see and again you see this with, and we can get into this, Tucker Carlson and a lot of the movement conservatives who have taken a very anti-Israel position. And I'm going to argue that you can be critical of a country for certain policies, of course, but to me that's a dog whistle. When you're that critical of the state of Israel, a criticism that you don't level at any other country, that is anti-Semitism, pure and simple.
Yeah, well, that's a broad and deep comment on the relationship between the conservative movement and Israel. So within the conservative movement, you have, of course, a big chunk of Christians, Christian religious people, and in their tradition in America. Israel has a very special place in their hearts and minds. And you already referred to it at the beginning of this interview, where you said, we are seeing America, the pilgrims saw America as the Jerusalem of the America as the new promised land. But we also see more criticism of the tight relationship between America and Israel in the Christian part of the conservative movement. How do you explain that? I mean, is there even anti-Semitism playing a role there, or what's going on there?
Well, anti-Semitism always plays a role, right? I mean, and no one's immune to that. I mean, Solzhenitsyn has said the line between good and evil goes through the heart of every human being. So the idea that, American Christians are immune to anti-Semitism, if nobody's immune to anti-Semitism or any evil. The Christians in America, were among the big proponents of Zionism in the late 19th and early 20th century. Many of the churches supported the Zionist movement and the creation of this, the recreation of the state of Israel. So there's always been that special relationship, much more than the Christian churches in Europe, certainly. So America's had that kind of special relationship. The evangelical movement has always been very supportive of Israel of a number of reasons. And of course, the Bible, calls us to support the Israel or support the Jewish people. I mean, so Christians are called to that. Unfortunately, we've seen cracks and fissures in that, and that it's hard to explain that, Evelyn, exactly, because I'm not a professor of theology, and I don't know. I think a lot of it is, again, it's anti-Semitism, again, kind of infecting the host. A lot of it's the propaganda, and we see this in schools, leftist propaganda, Islamist propaganda, which become very prevalent. And the whole point is to divide the Christians and Jews. It's almost like that is kind of this mission. We've got to break the tie, because if you're going to defeat Israel or cause great harm to the Jewish people, America, this, we're a secular country, but, we're predominantly Christian still. You need to break that ties between the very close, tight ties between American Christians and Jews. And I think that is part of the propaganda. It's working. It's in the schools. We've seen it. I mean, the center is getting ready to put out a report on anti-Semitism. We talk about American campuses and how horrible the American campuses have become, and kind of just Jew hatred centers. but it's affecting K through 12, right? Second, third graders, all the way up. Anti-Semitism instruction is in our schools. And where is that coming from, except for from the left? Whether it's all Islamic influence or just left, I guess that's the unholy alliance. So we're seeing it in the schools, and that affects and that seeps into churches. There's been great movements, I think, to really attack the evangelicals, and I'm not an evangelical. I'm just an American Christian who loves Israel. But the evangelicals have had that special relationship with Israel, particularly in the last, since the 1980s. But you're seeing, again, fissures and cracks in that. And I think a lot of that is the propaganda. And then all these other forces that we've been talking about to kind of divide us from our close relationship with Israel.
Yes, I've seen the same phenomenon a few decades ago, starting already in Europe, where I'm from, Holland, where there is also a strong Christian church and tradition, Protestant, which was very pro-Israel and pro-Jewish for the same reasons that, or comparable reasons as the American Christians were close with Israel and Jews. But it changed into anti-Israelism because now the Palestinians are seen as the victims, as the underdogs, that as a Christian and as a Christian church you should take care of, which turns the opinion for a big part within Christian churches in Holland and elsewhere in Europe against Israel. And
can I say something?
Yeah.
I just watched a documentary called Hate Among Us from a couple of years ago. But the thing that I didn't even realize was that in the past, the Ku Klux Klan had to wear masks. Now they march without masks in the United States. And with the whole Geschichte, and they're not afraid to show their faces. And that, I think, was one of the most shocking things that I just realized. Mm-hmm. It has become socially acceptable to be anti-Semitic in the United States.
Were you going to say something, Evelyn? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's become mainstream. I mean, it's becoming more and more mainstream. Again, I don't want to over-exaggerate. I think for the most part, America still has a great love of the Jewish people and Israel, but that used to be a much larger majority. And I want to go back, we talked about, in the 1960s, Israel was the underdog, and Israel had, overwhelming support among the American people. But Evelyn, you brought it up, the start of the Palestinian kind of propaganda, which a lot of it came from the KGB instruction of the Palestinians in the 1960s. That has, again, that's 60 years ago. And that has grown and metastasized into the American kind of our educational system. So there's no, and the world system, right? Yeah. So, but Israel in 1960 was not the powerful country. Israel is an incredibly powerful, influential country now. In the 1960s, it's always been a small country. It was mostly economically, it was social, semi-socialist. Certainly wasn't communist, but it was mostly a socialist economy. It was not the powerful country. It was an underdog, and that changed. I mean, Israel is a victim of its own success, right? Because it is now one of the incredibly entrepreneur, technological. It is one of the most powerful and important countries in the world. And I'm going to bring up George Gilder's book, The Israel Test, which I think is the best book written about anti-Semitism. And it comes down to one thing. It's all about envy. Either if you love Israel, then you're for success and prosperity and growth. If you hate Israel or hate the Jews, then envy is one of the great sins, right? Dante wrote, he put that as one of the top sins. If you're envious, then you're going to hate the Jews and you're going to hate Israel. And I really think that it again oversimplifies things a little bit. But Israel, when they were the underdog, when they were always being attacked, when they were not that powerful, we had great kind of sympathy for Israel. Well, there's no longer sympathy for Israel. There might be respect, I mean, the Abraham Accords came about not because they all of a sudden woke up loving Israel, because they respect Israel, because Israel is an incredibly powerful country. And I think, in a sense, the most powerful country in that region. Thank goodness for that, as our great ally. But that envy is another thing I think that has really caused a lot of these kind of this growth of anti-Semitism in America. And you're right, Phyllis. It's an open, really. It's not the anti-Semitism of, in 1920, if you grew up in Los Angeles and you wanted to be a dentist, USC had maybe 3 openings for Jews to go to the dental schools. You had to travel to Cleveland to get to get your degree and to become a dentist. I mean, that's prejudicial. That's anti-Semitism. Jew hatred is much worse. This is very different. And what we're seeing, the reaction to October 7th, I mean, there was maybe a few hours of sympathy. It immediately turned into this incredible support for Hamas, for the massacre, the slaughter of what happened. And that was just open. They weren't even trying to hide it. And that got tremendous amount of support, way too much support among American people, especially on the campuses. And that's really the really grotesque Jew hatred that we haven't seen. We've seen it in parts of the world, but we haven't seen in the Western world really to that degree since the 1930s. So again, another reason to be frightened. I'm really frightened.
And also, I just want to say that whereas I was a very early proponent of social media for marketing, it is beyond my understanding how easy it is to just click and share something that is horrendous. So, and the
That
ripple
doesn't help.
effect
Yeah.
is just
That doesn't help. That doesn't help.
Well, you can great freedom and great ideas can be transferred through social media and the internet, but also conspiracies, lies, and hatred is also spread through. So that when I talked about this kind of technological revolution we're going through, look, I mean the left and the Islamists and they travel in the same universe, right? So they're trading all of the lies and the conspiracies and the hate amongst the world. So yeah, that's yet another kind of front that we have to fight in the future. But you're exactly right, fellas.
So, Mike, what should we do against the rising anti-Semitism at the right, at the political right, and
I
against
think
against the Christians turning away from Israel?
Yeah, we have to define America first. I think it's important because look, I mean, Donald Trump, I think, has been the greatest friend of Israel among American, president, at least one of the greatest friends of Israel among American presidents. Not to get political, but he has been. I think he's been a great ally of Israel. And I don't think Donald Trump is anti-Semitic. I mean, he gets leveled, he gets called a fascist and all these things. But I think Donald Trump, he's a business transactional president. And I think he views Israel as a great friend, particularly in that neighborhood in that part of the world. So Donald Trump this is not in any way pointing fingers at Donald Trump. But we're going to have to, America First is going to have to be defined because he really has transformed the conservative movement and the Republican Party. And I don't think it's going to go back to the Republican Party of George W. Bush and free markets, open borders and all that, let's create democracy around the world. So we're not going back to that, but we're going to be really careful to define America First, which already has kind of historically a bad kind of name. I mean, America First, the America First movement wanted to keep us out of World War I all the way up until Pearl Harbor. There was a lot of good-hearted and honest and well-thought Americans that supported that movement, but there was also, of course, many German sympathizers. I don't want to overstate it again, but there was German sympathizers, Nazi sympathizers in that movement. Doesn't make the America First movement, Jew haters, but obviously there's elements in that movement. There's elements in the left, very strong elements of Jew hatred in the left today. We have to define America First for protecting American borders, protecting American sovereignty, but we're going to have to kind of draw the line and be very clear that kind of Jew hatred, anti-Semitism, is not going to be allowed in the conservative movement. I don't like getting to circular fire squads. And I don't want to start, go through the list of names. Kevin Roberts, who heads the Heritage Foundation, I don't think he's a Jew hater. He stepped into something he probably wishes he hadn't stepped into. He thought he's defending a friend. I used to be a huge fan of Tucker Carlson, and Evelyn, we've had conversations about that. it wasn't even the Fuentes interview that I've kind of broke my faith with Tucker Carlson when he interviewed that pastor for the West Bank who said Israel persecutes Christians. And Tucker just sat there with a blank face. He didn't say, what about Christian? First of all, that's a lie. That's a complete lie. Christians have a tremendous amount of liberty to practice their religion in Israel, certainly a little bit more than in Syria or the countries surrounding Israel.
Yeah.
But Tucker didn't even question that. So again, we're going to have to say, look, the conservative movement, the Republican Party, is going to remain a friend of Israel, and we are not going to allow that kind of Jew hatred and that anti-Semitism to seep into our party and our movement, because it will destroy the conservative movement. The left allows everyone in the party. They have tremendous amount of Jew haters and Islamists in their party. We know that, right? They have members of Congress who almost openly call for their love of Hamas and the destruction of Israel. Republican Party cannot go down that path. I mean, it cannot allow those kind of people into the party or into the conservative movement. And that's going to be difficult, but we're going to have to draw the line and keep this from becoming a wide kind of reign of terror, circular firing squad, because that can also destroy the conservative movement. This is a really, talk about a dire time for America. This is a dire time for the conservative movement, and critical that we get this right.
And so far, Senator Ted Cruz has spoken out against the anti-Semitism in the conservative movement, the rise of it. But President Trump or Vice President Vance have not said a word about it, as far as I know. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, Trump's kind of, he's kind of punting on this, right? At some point, I think he's going to have to kind of come out and make some kind of statement. I think that's critical. For J.D. Vance, if he wants to become president in 3 years, then he's going to have to come forward and make there's going to have to be some kind of reckoning where they come out and say, look, this is our position. I think it's probably going to be.
But they may lose the support from important influencers like Tucker Carlson and others who are.
Well, I think Tucker, I mean, the one, people will disagree with me, again, and he had that the West Bank pastor on. He had Nick Fuentes to me, and then he had the historian who's not even really an historian, talking about how Churchill was really the evil. Hitler it wasn't so bad. Churchill was the bad guy of World War II. I don't know what kind of historian he was, but this makes Tucker. I think it diminishes Tucker, right? When he has someone of a Nick Fuentes on, and Nick Fuentes is I don't know who's taking. I know he's got followers. But to me, it diminishes him. These are not serious guests, and I think Tucker, maybe it's just anecdotal. I'm one guy. I used to love watching Tucker show on Fox. He was one of the first ones that came out recognizing what Donald Trump was trying to do, and I respected that. But he lost me a long time ago. Believe me, he's lost a lot of people. So whatever popularity he has, I think, is shifting. And I think the conservative movement, you let Nick Fuentes, give him that platform. I would have never had him. He needs to have serious guests on. Nick Fuentes is not a serious guest. But if you watch the interview and listen to him, Nick Fuentes cannot be at least taken seriously from the sense of he's a hate monger. He does not belong in the American conversation as far as a serious thinker. And I would like to think, I hope I'm not being too optimistic or being naive. I worry when I say this is that people will not take him seriously and his influence will falter. But I could be completely wrong on that because, again, anti-Semitism and Jew hatred is its own being. And, you start spewing this kind of hatred and lies, does that also create a movement? Do people become very susceptible to fall for that kind of talk? So, again, that's why this is really difficult, Evelyn and Phyllis. I mean, how the conservative movement's going to handle this. And I don't have all those answers, but you're going to have to draw the line. And they cannot be major figures in the conservative movement, and definitely not in you can't change. I mean, David Duke was a KKK neo-Nazi, and he said, I support Ronald Reagan. Well, Ronald Reagan couldn't help that. Ronald Reagan denounced him, but you can't help having people say, I support Nick Fuentes. He can go out and say, I support Donald Trump. We can't stop him from saying that. But at some point, Donald Trump or the conservative movement's going to have to come out and say, okay, they've got free speech. They can say whatever they want, but they are not welcome in my movement. You're going to have to make those kind of and that's going to happen.
Yep. Yep. So what
So
can be done, Mike, to save the fundaments of America's free society?
Well, I think hold to the kind of the values, and we need to work. We need to educate ourselves. We need to educate. We cannot rely on public education in the schools, private schools or public education. Parents need to talk to their children about the greatness of America, the greatness of our relationship with Israel, the beauty of American culture, all these things that we've been talking about. We've kind of forgotten. So we need to restore some of those beliefs and values. The relationship, because we've talking about Israel and anti-Semitism, the relationship between Americans and Israel, the relationship between Christians in this country and Jews, I think it's a long-standing over several hundred years. We have a history of friendship and love for the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and since 1947, we need to talk about that and educate our children. I mean, there's too many children now that are not even educated, that the Holocaust, what's the Holocaust, right? I mean, are we really teaching about these things in our schools? It's critical that we do educate our children outside of the schools and then pressure the schools to, on curriculum. We allowed them to become, this Howard Zinn kind of indoctrination camp for American children. Well, we need to go a short march through the institutions and try to impact American education to teach. If you're going to teach the faults and the bad things, then you better start teaching about the beauty, the greatness, and the aspiration of American culture and our history.
And that can all be read more about in your fantastic book, A Time to Stand, The Dire Hour to Defend American Beauty. I can recommend, I've read it from cover to cover. I can recommend it to everybody to read.
and I want to thank you, Mike, for being on our show. This has been such an informative program. I want to thank our listeners for listening. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself, please go to Never Again Is Now podcast on a variety of channels. And as
On YouTube, Spotify,
yes,
Apple Podcasts, and iHeart. Yep.
yes. And as I end every show, I say, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Evelyn. I'm very grateful. It's been a real honor, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you again. Thank you.